Liberal Viewer presents.
So, welcome to Liberal Viewer Sunday Live Clip Roundup. Thanks for joining me. I've picked out about 36 of the weekend's best clips for what should be a really good show for you tonight. Very heavy on the political comedy this week. As usual, my clips come mostly from the Sunday morning news analysis shows on the big five corporate outlets of ABC, NBC, CBS, CNN, and Fox News, the so-called corporate media here in the United States. I'll also have a few political comedy clips from HBO's Real Time with Bill Maher last Friday, and quite a few clips from last night's White House Correspondents' dinner with comedian Cecily Strong from Saturday Night Live, and of course, comedian-in-chief President Barack Obama. You can see all the topics I'm covering listed down in the video description, and if you're watching this as a recorded show, you should see time indexes down there to skip to the topics that most interest you. Topics tonight include the continuing topic of race and cops with, this week, the death of an unarmed black man in custody in Baltimore leading to protests. Breaking news about the earthquake in Nepal that killed thousands. Revelations this week about U.S. drone strikes mistakenly killing hostages last January. A preview of the marriage equality case before the U.S. Supreme Court that's coming up this week. A quick clip on Bruce Jenner's recent interview and what it means for transgender rights. Several clips on the upcoming book attacking Hillary Clinton called Clinton Cash. There's a couple clips at the end, first on the topic of free speech and then Citizens United and campaign finance reform. But before I get to all that, I want to show a bunch of clips from one of my favorite annual political events, the White House Correspondents' Dinner, where you get to see a famous comedian and the President of the United States do stand-up comedy routines about politics and the media. I guess I like it because stand-up comedy is one of my favorite things, and politics and the media are two of my favorite topics. I'm always surprised at what good stand-up comedians presidents of the United States have generally been over the years, and Barack Obama is one of the great ones, so I want to start off with several clips showing his best jokes, beginning with one of my favorites discussing whether he has a presidential bucket list for his final 2 years in office in this clip.
I am determined to make the most of every moment I have left. After the midterm elections, my advisors asked me, Mr. President, do you have a bucket list? And I said, well, I have something that rhymes with bucket list. Take executive action on immigration? Bucket. New climate regulations? Bucket. It's the right thing to do.
So, did that count as a self-deprecating joke? I'm not sure. I guess President Obama was kind of making fun of the new executive freedom he's been exerting since the midterm elections, but Obama also spent a lot of time making fun of his critics, with one of my favorites taking on this criticism I often hear about him that he's the worst president in history or something like that. And you can see how he took that criticism on over in this clip.
A few weeks ago, Dick Cheney says he thinks I'm the worst president of his lifetime. Which is interesting because I think Dick Cheney is the worst president of my lifetime. Quite a coincidence.
Quite a coincidence. And you gotta love the audience reaction. And for the last of the clips of President Obama that I picked out from the actual White House Correspondents' Dinner broadcast, here's a great one making fun of the effect of conservative billionaires like the Koch brothers on Republican politics over in this clip.
Soon the first presidential contest will take place, and I, for one, cannot wait to see who the Koch brothers pick. It's exciting. Marco Rubio, Rand Paul, Ted Cruz, Jeb Bush, Scott Walker. Who will finally get that red rose? The winner gets a $1 billion war chest. The runner-up gets to be the Bachelor on the next season of The Bachelor. I mean, seriously, $1 billion from just two guys. Is it just me, or does that feel a little excessive? It's almost insulting to the candidates. The Koch brothers think they need to spend $1 billion to get folks to like one of these people. It's got to hurt their feelings a little bit. And look, I know I've raised a lot of money too, but in all fairness, my middle name is Hussein. What's their excuse?
I thought that was also pretty funny and even insightful, and that's the last clip of President Obama I picked out myself from the White House Correspondents' dinner, but I also want to show a few of the ways that President Obama's stand-up routine ended up on the Sunday morning news shows this morning. First, a compilation from CBS's Face the Nation that picked out several other good jokes from President Obama, with only one repeat of that Dick Cheney joke I already showed you. And then it starts off with a little introduction from Bob Schieffer explaining what the White House Correspondents' dinner is over in this clip.
Night was the annual White House Correspondents' dinner, where Washington politicians and the media mixed with Hollywood, but it was President Obama who stole the show.
Good evening, everybody. Welcome to the White House Correspondents' dinner, the night when Washington celebrates itself. Somebody's got to do it. Now, look, it is true I have not managed to make everybody happy. 6 years into my presidency, some people still say I'm arrogant and aloof, condescending. Some people are so dumb. No wonder I don't meet with them. And that's not all people say about me. A few weeks ago, Dick Cheney says he thinks I'm the worst president of his lifetime. Which is interesting because I think Dick Cheney is the worst president of my lifetime. Quite a coincidence. It gets worse. Just this week, Michelle Bachmann actually predicted that I would bring about the biblical end of days. Now that's a legacy. That's big. I mean, Lincoln, Washington, they didn't do that. But, you know, I just had to put this stuff aside. I've got to stay focused on my job because for many Americans, this is still a time of deep uncertainty. For example, I have one friend, just a few weeks ago, she was making millions of dollars a year, and she's now living out of a van in Iowa.
So all of those jokes were good, I thought, though I'll let you decide if President Obama stole the show after I show a bunch of clips from comedian Cecily Strong in a couple minutes. But first I want to show a couple examples of targets of President Obama's jokes reacting to them. First, Senator John McCain appearing on CNN's State of the Union, where guest host Jim Acosta asked him about being the butt of an Obama joke last night over in this clip.
Frankly. Okay. And let me ask you about the president's remarks last night. I'm sure you probably noticed, or you've heard since last night, the president took a little swipe at you when talking about the security lapses at the White House and fence jumpers and so forth. He made a suggestion as to how to beef up security at 1600 Pennsylvania Avenue. Let's throw to that tape.
I'm happy to report that the Secret Service, thanks to some excellent reporting by White House correspondents, they're really focusing on some of the issues that have come up, and they finally figured out a foolproof way to keep people off my lawn. Senator, I don't know if you can see it there in Arizona, but there was a picture of you
basically saying, "Get off my lawn," over at the White House. What was your response to that? What did you make of that?
Well, I'm reporting for duty on Monday morning in my usual laid-back, casual style, my diplomatic style. I'm telling you, I'll get that Secret Service squared away. I'm ready for the job.
All right, very good, Senator.
So I guess John McCain was a good sport there, reacting to the "Hey, you kids, get out of my yard," angry old man joke with a little joke of his own. And I guess you'd have to say that Fox News Sunday also acted like a good sport when they played this final clip of President Obama's stand-up routine. This one features Keegan-Michael Key from Comedy Central's Key and Peele show playing Luther, Obama's anger translator, over in this clip.
Well, they held the White House Correspondents' Dinner last night, also called the Nerd Prom, where we reporters get to pretend we're friends with Hollywood stars. President Obama spoke and brought on his anger translator to say the things he was really thinking.
Despite our differences, we count on the press to shed light on the most important issues of the day.
And we can count on Fox News to terrify old white people with some nonsense. Sharia law is coming to Cleveland, run for the damn hills! Y'all's ridiculous.
Up next, our Power Player of the Week, the head of...
So I guess Fox News was a good sport for playing the joke, although they didn't really comment on it or make a joke of their own like Senator John McCain did. But I guess at least they played that. They didn't play Cecily Strong's jokes about Fox News that I'll get to in a minute. But the first joke I want to show, moving over to the Cecily Strong part of the program, is one she began with pretty early on, talking about the Secret Service problem also. And this is one of 6 jokes that I picked out from the White House Correspondents' Dinner broadcast of Cecily Strong that I thought was pretty funny over here.
Okay, I'm just kidding. No, because let's give it up for the Secret Service. Yeah. I don't want to be too hard on those guys, you know, because they're the only law enforcement agency in the country that will get in trouble if a black man gets shot. Are you saying boo or are you saying true?
I don't know. I don't know why they were booing that, because I thought that was pretty funny. And I also like the way she dealt with her competency to talk about politics over in the joke you can see here.
Feels so weird to be up here. And okay, I promise, since I'm only a comedian, I'm not going to try to tell you politicians how to do politics or whatever. That's not my job. That'd be like you guys telling me what to do with my body. I mean, can you even imagine? Crazy. No.
Yeah, I thought that was pretty funny, especially for the anti-choice Republicans who are out there in the crowd at the White House Correspondents' Dinner. And even though Cecily Strong said that she didn't want to tell the politicians how to do their politics, she did take on the media somewhat. And as I promised, here are a couple jokes she made about Fox News in her routine over here.
Fox News is here. Now, Fox News has been losing a lot of viewers lately, and may they rest in peace. That's nice to say. That channel is all hot blonde ladies and old dudes. You know, every show on Fox News looks like a party scene from Weekend at Bernie's.
Yeah, I guess Fox News viewers are old, so they're fair game on that kind of joke. Those are pretty good jokes, I guess. I mean, not the best Fox News jokes I ever heard, but they're still pretty good. And I also want to show a better joke that I thought Cecily Strong made about journalism in general, where she actually tried to get the journalists in the crowd to take an oath over in this clip.
All right, guys. Now, this next part is a repeat after me, so I need your help here. I want all the media to put their hands up and swear something this election season, okay? I solemnly swear not to talk about Hillary's appearance, because that is not journalism. Also, Cecily Strong looks great tonight.
I like how she added that little part at the end to sort of skewer herself, and at the same time she's skewering the media for its concentration on appearance, because appearance actually is important, not just for women, but for political candidates and for comedians who are on network television. So I don't know, but I thought that was also a kind of funny joke, and I have a couple more from Cecily Strong. In this one, I thought, let me make sure I got the right one next. Oh, having made that joke that sounded almost like she's a Hillary Clinton supporter, then she talked a little bit about Elizabeth Warren over in this clip.
A lot of people want Elizabeth Warren to run for president, but many think she's too idealistic and her proposed policies are too liberal. But look at President Obama. I mean, people thought the same thing about him. He didn't end up doing any of that stuff. Now,
I think President Obama's reaction there in some ways is a little bit more interesting than the joke itself, where he kind of nods along with that, although I don't completely buy the premise of that joke, because I thought way back in 2008 when President Obama was running for president that he was kind of a centrist, not from the left wing of the party like Elizabeth Warren is, and but I'm not really gonna take issue with the joke. It was kind of funny, and President Obama's reaction was a little bit weird, I thought. And then finally, the last joke I want to show from Cecily Strong last night at the White House Correspondents' dinner. It kind of comes around full circle, a little bit similar to that Secret Service joke she made at the beginning. And another joke that I thought was pretty funny, maybe one of the funniest jokes of her routine over here.
after 6 years in office, your approval rating is at 48%. Not only that, your gray hair is at 85%. Your hair is so white now, it can talk back to the police. We'll high five about that later.
President Obama seemed to like that joke. That's a pretty good joke. Your hair's so white now that it can talk back to the police. Well, you can let me know what you think down in the comments section. I'm going to move on from the White House Correspondents' dinner, even though I enjoyed showing you all of those jokes. I actually am going to move on to the issue that Cecily Strong raised with that last joke and with her first joke. The issue of race and policing, like I said, came up again this week when this unarmed African American, again, was arrested by police in Baltimore, Freddie Gray, and sometime during his arrest or when he was in this custody van, ended up with severed spine, or mostly severed spine, and died about a week later. And there are all these protests in Baltimore over it. And I want to start off with sort of a little bit of a summary of what's been going on in Baltimore, and then this is from CBS's Face the Nation. Bob Schieffer does the intro, and then he asks a question to Representative Elijah Cummings, who's actually the representative from that district, which I thought was interesting, and I'll talk about all of that a little more if you see that clip over here.
Back home, the protests in Baltimore following the death of Freddie Gray, who died last Sunday from a spinal injury sustained while in police custody, turned from peaceful to violent last night. Tension rose following a march through downtown Baltimore that drew thousands of people. After that, protesters clashed with police officers, police car windows were smashed, a convenience store was looted, and some 1,200 policemen were deployed to keep the peace. 12 arrests were made, and fans were kept inside the Oriole ballpark at Camden Yards until things outside the stadium settled down. And we are joined now by Congressman Elijah Cummings, who represents Baltimore. Congressman, this didn't happen in Baltimore. It happened in your neighborhood.
In my neighborhood.
So you were there last night.
Yes, I was.
Bring us up to speed.
Well, we had a situation where, of course, Mr. Gray died a week ago. And I think the thing that upset so many people was the fact that his young man, we still don't know exactly why he was arrested. We do know that he was hollering out for aid He was not given aid after being arrested, and we also know that he was not seat belted. And the next thing we knew, a week later, Bob, he was dead. And a lot of people are very, very frustrated as to trying to figure out what happened here, and it's very upsetting.
So that was Elijah Cummings' answers about the facts. I noticed in that report that Bob Schieffer mentioned how the protests turned violent, and he seemed to really, Bob Schieffer seemed to really fixate on the violence of the protests, even when Elijah Cummings was starting to talk about how this race and police issue is like the civil rights issue of our time, and you can see that over in this clip.
Well, you were there.
Yes.
What triggered this violence? I mean, this started out peacefully.
Well, I got to give it to the citizens of Baltimore. I was there all day, and it was very peaceful all day. Thousands of people, and then at the end, there were a few people who said, "We're gonna turn this city down. We're gonna close it down." And the next thing you know, we had a few people, mainly from out of town, to come and to start beating up on police cars and throwing all kinds of projectiles. But the fact is that for the most part, it could have been worse. But again, this whole police community relations situation. Bob is the civil rights cause for this generation, no doubt about it. This thing here, the cell phone with the camera, this has caused a whole new situation where a lot of the police interaction with citizens is being recorded. That used to not be the case with when you and I were coming up.
Mm-hmm. How did they get this stopped last night?
Basically, what we did was the mayor, to her credit, and the police commissioner went on air and told people to go home. I went on air and asked people to go home and tell people to email and text their relatives that were down there. A lot of them left. And the next thing you know, then of course we had the rain that came along, and that helped. But pretty much, and then we had a lot of people in our community, and I got to give credit to the people of Baltimore. A lot of community leaders were in the crowd saying, "This is our house. We will protect our house," and asking people not to be violent. Like I said, it could have been worse.
So I don't know what you think, but I think that Bob Schieffer was too heavily focused on the violent crowd reaction, and you can see the entire interview by clicking on Face the Nation down in the video description. And I'm not sure, he did at one point mention that Elijah Cummings, later in the interview, he mentioned that Elijah Cummings had said that this police issue was like the civil rights issue of this generation, but then he went back to the whole violence issue, and I don't know why that is. Another interesting interview that was on this same topic was from musician John Legend, was over on CNN State of the Union talking to Jim Acosta, and I guess he started this campaign called Free America to end mass incarceration, and he talked about how this is a growing civil rights movement, and with all these almost daily occurrences, it seems every week I have a new unarmed black man who's been killed in some way by police to talk about in the news. And he, John Legend, when he was talking to Jim Acosta, also made the really important point that I've made in a video that you can see down in the video description: cops, justice system, racist, classist, or both, which is talking about our racist and classist criminal justice system. The book The New Jim Crow by Michelle Alexander, and this book here, The Divide by Matt Taibbi, that talk about those two issues, the racism and the classism in our criminal justice system. And so here's John Legend talking about that on CNN State of the Union, segueing from all the violence from police we see on cell phone cameras to that more important mass incarceration issue here.
More technology that allows us to have transparency, but I think this has been happening.
Cell phone cameras.
Yeah, cell phone cameras, and I think it's, in some ways, it's a good thing, but in other ways, it's almost like it's numbing the extent to which we're seeing it, because we're seeing something new almost every other day.
The case down in South Carolina.
Yeah, South Carolina, we're seeing in Baltimore, we're seeing all over the country. It's almost to the point where it seems so commonplace that I don't want us to get too used to it. We still need to be outraged about these things.
Yeah. And I'm just curious, we have not heard from President Obama on this situation in Baltimore and on the situation in South Carolina for the last couple of weeks. He hasn't commented on it. He has a lot on his plate, obviously. He's working on a lot of different issues. You've been a big supporter of his over the years. Do you think he's said enough on this?
I think there's more to be said, but I also think it's not as important that he comments on every case. It's important that we reform the system on the federal level, on the state and local level as well. And it's not just about these killings, which are very important and a huge concern in the community, but it's also about what I've been talking about for a bit in the past couple of weeks is mass incarceration and the overall way that the criminal justice system treats particularly black and brown communities, poor communities. We are the most incarcerated nation in the world, and we've gotten there through a set of policies that have been in existence over the last 40 years. We have to have more than just press conferences. We need to have real changes in policies.
And John,
that is really important, that point that John Legend makes there about mass incarceration. And he also makes the important point that a lot of it's at the state and local level, not the federal level, and there's a lot of work to do, not just press conferences about how to respond to these incidents of police violence, but the structural problems with the criminal justice system. So I was happy to see that. And before I leave the issue of race, this doesn't have to do with police at all, and I guess it's moving from black and brown to yellow. This is about the subject of why Asian people are called yellow, and also about some of the stereotypes in network sitcoms. Came up in an interview that Bill Maher did on Friday night with Eddie Huang, who I guess is a chef and also is the creator of this ABC show Fresh Off the Boat that I actually enjoy, although he had kind of mixed feelings about it, that some of it was too sitcom formulaic and not really his vision for the show. And then he also talked about why Asians are called yellow and couldn't really explain it over in this clip.
But I feel like you wanted to break the stereotype, and then you got caught in the Hollywood mill and you found out, no, the Hollywood feels, no, it's better to use the stereotypes. Is that what happened?
Yeah. I mean, they want to tell universal white stories with yellow faces, black faces, brown faces, but they tell the same universal story. And you go watch how these sitcoms are made in writers' rooms. They're like labs, dude. It's like GMO food they're making.
Right. You're right. But I know there are more important issues than this, but you mentioned this. I never got the yellow thing. I don't see Asian people as yellow. I have never seen yellow. When I don't see colors that great, but you're not. I don't see you as a yellow person.
I just go with it so that I can
yellow?
claim the emojis as my people.
Okay.
That's the only reason I'm going around.
All right. I'm glad we got that.
I thought that was kind of funny, especially after that excerpt video I made several weeks back about whether emojis are racist because they don't have any black or brown emojis, or very few of them, and I got a lot of blowback on that video because people thought I took that whole thing too seriously, even though it was based on a Saturday Night Live joke. But I wanted to show that final clip on the issue of race that was kind of silly, but moving from the ridiculous then to the much more sublime, the serious issue, this breaking news, many people dead in Nepal from this earthquake, and I didn't want to let that issue go by without showing a couple clips, or that breaking news go by. First, I want to show a clip of Richard Engel on NBC's Meet the Press, where I thought his report, they talked about the deaths, and he's actually in Kathmandu, so he's on the ground with some reporting, but his reporting seemed to focus a little bit too much on what's going on in the hotels, which may show you his perspective, although he's also out in the parks with some of the displaced people. And he also focused a lot on Mount Everest. Maybe that's just what people are most interested in over in this clip.
Rescue efforts are underway after the worst earthquake to hit Nepal in more than 80 years. It struck near the capital, Kathmandu. The death toll is now over 2,000. It includes 17 climbers who were killed by avalanches on Mount Everest. In fact, one Nepali journalist said this: "The sadness is sinking in. Our history, the places we grew up." For the latest, let's go to our chief foreign correspondent, Richard Engel, who is in Kathmandu this morning. Richard?
Chuck, Kathmandu is now a city where people aren't living inside their homes. Every green space has been taken over. People are afraid to go into their homes, to sleep inside their homes. Behind me is one of the biggest parks in the city, but it is not just this park. People are sleeping and cooking with their families on the sidewalks, in the middle of the streets. They're afraid that there could be another major earthquake or just more of these aftershocks. We felt today one of the aftershocks when we arrived. It happened just as we had landed at the airport. We were going through immigration, and suddenly the building started shaking. The immigration officers ran away, ran outside for cover. Then they came back, and I think people have been amazingly calm. In the several hours we've been here, we have seen people quite resilient, taking it with a take it as it comes attitude. There are still foreigners in this city, and they don't have, their situation isn't much better than the people who are living in the parks behind me. The hotels are operating in a status of kind of semi-evacuation. The hotels aren't kicking out their guests. They have nowhere to go, and there aren't many flights out of here. So the guests are stuck there, but they don't want the guests to go up to the rooms, especially the upper floors. So the guests are sleeping in the lobby, they're sleeping in some of the lower hallways, and mostly they're just sleeping in the gardens and in the parking lot in front of the hotels. We don't know how long this is going to last like this. People I've been speaking to in the parks think they might be here for several more days, maybe a week. But it is not just here. There is the even more mysterious situation on Mount Everest. Some climbers have been evacuated from Mount Everest. Several, at least 17, including 2 Americans, have been killed. But I think we'll only be learning more about what exactly happened on Mount Everest as those survivors come off the mountain. They can be debriefed, and teams can go in to see what happened.
So I guess that wasn't a bad report, but it did seem a little focused on what's going on in the hotels in Mount Everest. At least I think so, but you can let me know what you think. And I'll compare it to one other clip I want to show on the Nepal earthquake. This is from CBS. Bob Schieffer then introducing their reporter, Holly Williams, who's also in Kathmandu. I think she just has audio, but then they show a bunch of pictures while she's reporting over in this clip.
More than 2,400 dead, thousands more injured after a 7.8 earthquake hit the country yesterday. The epicenter was just north of Kathmandu, Nepal's capital and its largest city, but strong aftershocks in the region, some as high as 6.7, are making rescue efforts more difficult. CBS News correspondent Holly Williams is there. Holly.
Good morning, Bob. It was just before noon here in the Kathmandu Valley yesterday when the earth began to shake violently, and that continued for several minutes, burying people beneath their own homes and tearing up roads in some areas. It also demolished several centuries-old towers and temples in this historic city. Rescue workers here are picking through the rubble of toppled buildings. They're obviously hoping to find survivors, but they're expecting to find more bodies. And we may not know the final death toll here in Nepal for several days to come. This is an impoverished country, one of the world's poorest, and a disaster like this one will severely test its resources. The hospitals here are struggling to cope with the sheer number of injured people. There have been plenty of promises of international help, but the airport was closed in Kathmandu until this morning, so very little of it has come in. I was just driving through the center of the city, and everywhere I went, I saw people sitting out, camping out on the street, some of them in the middle of the street. They are too terrified to stay at home, too terrified to be anywhere near a building. Aftershocks are still jolting the city, and people are fearful that more buildings could collapse. One aftershock hit just after I arrived in Kathmandu this morning. I was inside the airport as the ground started to heave. Light fixtures were swinging from the ceiling, and many people ran for the exit, fearing another large quake. Nepal sits high in the Himalayas, as you know, and it's also located on the edge of a tectonic plate. It's prone to earthquakes, but this is the biggest quake in over 80 years, and some scientists had predicted the country was overdue for a big one. The quake even triggered an avalanche on Mount Everest, where hundreds of climbers were attempting an ascent. It's thought several people were killed. Others were also killed as far away as China and Bangladesh. Bob?
So, yeah, I thought that report was better than the one from NBC's Meet the Press and Richard Engel. I mean, not that the other one was bad, but I thought that one had more facts and more focus on the most important details and less focused on the hotels in Mount Everest, which I think are the hotels are where the journalists are, and the Mount Everest is sort of the most sensational, but maybe least newsworthy in terms of how it affects the greatest amount of people. But speaking of people whose deaths aren't really reported that often or aren't focused on enough, I want to show several clips on revelations about the U.S. drone strike program. President Obama apologized last week for some drone strikes back in January that killed a couple hostages, one American hostage, one Italian hostage. And I'm going to show a few clips on that, starting with a summary report this is also from NBC's Meet the Press, but this is from Chuck Todd, and I think it's actually a pretty good report over in this.
News of the week. One of the most striking changes in American foreign policy under President Obama has been a major escalation of drone strikes on al-Qaeda targets in Pakistan, Yemen, and Somalia. And controversy about Americans who have joined al-Qaeda have been targeted and killed. In fact, we learned of the latest instance this week when the White House revealed that 2 American al-Qaeda leaders and 2 hostages, one Italian and one American, had been killed in drone strikes in January. Yet no one in government used the word drone strike, and politicians from both parties have been strangely reluctant to even talk about the issue.
We all bleed when we lose an American life. We all grieve when any innocent life is taken.
The who, what, when, where, why, and how are all still murky. On January 14th, American aid worker Warren Weinstein, kidnapped in 2011, and Italian Giovanni Laporto, held since 2012, were killed when an al-Qaeda compound in Pakistan's remote Shawal Valley was hit by a CIA drone strike. Another American, Ahmed Farouk, a deputy al-Qaeda commander, was also killed. On January 19th, a second strike killed American Adam Gadon, al-Qaeda's top spokesman, with $1 million bounty on his head.
Mr. Gadon was not specifically targeted.
The problem for the U.S. in these and other instances is that the CIA often does not know who it is killing, targeting only high-level al-Qaeda leadership. 2 years ago, President Obama pledged to scale back the drone campaign.
And before any strike is taken, there must be near certainty that no civilians will be killed or injured.
But so-called signature strikes have continued. That's when the CIA fires a missile based on a pattern of behavior of people on the ground, even if it does not know who it's killing. By independent estimates, of the more than 3,800 people killed by drones since 9/11, as many as 12% have been civilians. CIA Director John Brennan said this month that the deaths have been overstated.
A lot of these stories that you hear about in terms of, oh my goodness, there are hundreds of civilians that are killed, whatever, a lot of that is propaganda that is put out by those elements that are very much opposed to the U.S. coming in and helping.
But few dispute the drone war is hurting U.S. prestige abroad. Just 14% of Pakistanis view the U.S. favorably. Meanwhile, in Washington this week and on the campaign trail, a deafening silence. Rand Paul staged a 13-hour filibuster 2 years ago to protest U.S. drone policy. This time, his campaign issued just a sentence. It is a tragedy that these hostages lost their lives. My prayers and thoughts are with their families. A reminder of the collective reluctance of Washington to question President Obama's covert war.
So, like I said, I thought that was a fairly good report from Meet the Press, NBC, Chuck Todd there, talking about the recent revelations about the drone program. And although I normally don't show pundits on, because I'm like commenting on the news already, and I don't want to comment on other commenters. One pundit, I guess, a expert on drones who they had on, was from the Council on Foreign Relations. I think, let me make sure I get his name right. It's Micah, is it Zenko? Yeah, Micah Zenko, who made a really important point, important enough to show, even though he's not an actual public official. He followed a former public official, Tom Donnelly, Tom Donilon, who from the Obama administration, who said the drone program is really important and effective and really defended it. And I'm not going to show you any clips of that, but I am going to show you this clip of Micah Zenko making this really important point about the false choice between drone strikes or more involved military action. And then Chuck Todd sort of follow up on that and his additional important point about how the drone capability can drive policy over in this clip.
By Mr. Donilon just now.
Well, that outline presumes the assumption that the United States must be continuously using military force against a wide array of militant and terrorist organizations. So once you start with that assumption, this sort of, I would say the binary policy choices the White House presents is you can either have a massive military occupation like Iraq, or you can conduct drone strikes, in which case they become particularly wise and ethical. But I would say that the real question is, why is it that the United States has been conducting these strikes since November 3rd, 2002, 50 under President Bush, 475 under President Obama, and the groups that the United States has been trying to defeat and eliminate either stay the same in size, grow, or they move to other countries. So the real question is, how effective has this been as part of the comprehensive strategy that Mr. Donilon claims the United States has employed?
What is the unintended consequence, do you believe, of being able to engage militarily without, basically with a robot, with a drone, without any potentially risking blood and treasure when it comes to a military hit?
Well, compared to all other weapons platforms, drones have these inherent advantages to them, which is they can persist over targets for extensively long times. They're very responsive in terms of putting a munition on top of a facility or a car or an individual. And obviously, they don't place U.S. service members at any degree of risk. And subsequently, since the U.S. first had this capability, it significantly lowers the threshold for when civilian policymakers will authorize the use of force. There have been something like 425 drone strikes in Pakistan. No president would have ever authorized 425 manned aircraft raids into Pakistan or special operators raids. So it's the capability itself that changes the calculus for when presidents, CIA directors, Pentagon officials will authorize the use of force.
So that last point, I think, is also really important. Like I said, that the capability of the drones can drive the policy. The fact that you can send in these, flying killer robots into areas like Pakistan, which is a sovereign country. It's the tribal area, Waziristan, whatever, but it's still sovereign territory of Pakistan. And going in and getting Osama bin Laden with a strike force, that caused all sorts of international relations problems. And so having this drone capability does sort of create a temptation for U.S. policymakers to exert military force where they wouldn't exert military force before. And that's the important point that he started making, that you shouldn't even start with the assumption that you need to exert military force necessarily to increase U.S. national security. But that point wasn't really made on the other programs that dealt with this issue, although I am going to show you John McCain talking about it. He, of course, didn't make that point. His point was this was an intelligence failure, and after watching this a couple times and some other clips, I'm not going to show you. The explanation I have for that is because he's the chair of the House Armed Services Committee, and he wants drone strikes to be moved from CIA jurisdiction and the Intelligence Committee jurisdiction over to the armed services, over to the Pentagon and the military, so that it's under the jurisdiction of his Armed Services Committee. And that actually might be a good thing, but I'll talk about that a little more after you watch John McCain say that this whole drone strike problem came from an intelligence failure over here.
Thanks for getting up so early this morning.
Thank you, Jim.
You've had a couple of days to mull this over, the drone strikes that resulted in the deaths of those two hostages. Were their deaths preventable, in your view?
I think it was probably preventable in that there was an obvious breakdown in intelligence. So they didn't know that they were there, and as you know, all of our prayers and thoughts are with their families. So it was obviously preventable. But the question then is, do we continue these drone strikes, and how important are they? It raises all of those questions, and it's clearly a subject for review by both Intelligence and Armed Services committees and the entire Congress.
And
So you can see even at the end there, he mentions the Intelligence and Armed Services Committee. And if you look at the entire interview of John McCain on CNN State of the Union, which you can find by clicking on a link down in the video description, you'll see he specifically addresses his bias as chair of the Armed Services Committee, wanting to bring all the drone strikes under the jurisdiction of the Pentagon and the military, which actually may give more oversight and more regulation than having it be under the CIA, which has much more, covert. Although not that the public would learn that much more about it if it were under Pentagon control. I'm not saying that they would be good drone strikes then, because I think a lot of the great majority of the drone strikes, maybe even all of them, especially the ones outside of areas where there are declared wars, are problematic. Although, I don't know, the taking strikes against the Taliban or against Al-Qaeda in Pakistan is probably authorized under the authorization of use of military force that came, what was it, September 20th, 2001? It was somewhere like a week or 10 days after September 11th, where they said that the U.S. is authorized to go after those who committed 9/11 and their associates, and that would be Al-Qaeda and the Taliban. So even if they're in Pakistan, I guess that is congressionally authorized, even though it was, like 14 years ago now. That's why the authorization was just way too broad. But I want to show one more clip on the drone issue that brings up another important issue, or another important aspect of the drone strikes. This is from Real Time with Bill Maher, not the part that was broadcast, but the overtime segment, which is on YouTube and is actually even a live event on YouTube. And you can see the entire 15-minute or so overtime segment with a link down in the video description. Here's the beginning of it, where they talk about drone strikes and make an important point I'll talk about after you see it over here.
Should the U.S. rethink its drone policy? Oh, yes, we didn't get to that issue. We should have, because there was a big, of course, recognition of a boo-boo this week. We killed 2 hostages in a drone strike in January, and 2 Americans who we were actually trying to kill because they're Al-Qaeda. And Obama apologized to the hostages' families.
First apology that a civilian has gotten, even though the government estimates up to 1,000 civilians have been
I know
impacted.
apologies don't go over well with conservatives.
No, there's
Depends on your type of concern.
It depends on what you're doing. It depends on what you're doing. I mean, if he were going to stop the drone policy, then an apology would be appropriate. I can understand his, but he's not going to. He's going to continue with it, and I can understand the contrition.
The drone king.
But this raid, the fact that it did hit 2 Al-Qaeda people, in a horrible way, the fact that those 2 hostages were killed shows what horrible stuff they were doing. It shows that they were actually warm. They were onto real Al-Qaeda people.
Well,
that they weren't
warm, unlike the bodies of the hostages.
No, but they weren't hitting a wedding party.
You're actually arguing this is acceptable collateral damage.
Once a hostage is kidnapped, there's not a lot. Your options get very limited. It's horrible.
In some ways, this is actually a bad example for why the drone program is bad. What better examples are when they hit wedding parties.
That's right.
That's actually usually.
I think.
And that last point from what's her name, Anna Marie Cox, not the point by Christopher Caldwell, I didn't agree with. He's from the Weekly Standard and a conservative, but the Anna Marie Cox point about these drone strikes not really being the best example, the collateral damage is more important when there have been hundreds of people who aren't Americans and Italians who've been killed. And what it actually reminds me of is this book right here, Manufacturing Consent by Noam Chomsky, which I haven't finished, but I've read large parts of it at this point, and one of the points he makes real early on and throughout the book, at least the part I've read, is about the way the media reports on worthy victims and unworthy victims. And I guess this American hostage and this Italian hostage, they're worthy victims, but all the nameless, faceless, Muslims, Pakistanis, Pashtun, or whatever their ethnicity is, those people who have been killed by these drone strikes, they're not worthy victims that get so much coverage. I've pointed that out before, like in plane crashes, the U.S. media always reports like how many Americans were killed. It's like a pro forma thing. I don't know why. I guess that's what people want to know, or they're responding to the needs of their viewers, or are they creating the needs? I don't know. You can let me know what you think. That's the last clip I want to show on the drone issue, although I actually did make a video on drones a while back. I think it's called something like Limits on Obama's Killer Flying Robots or something like that. I'm actually pretty proud of that video if you want to know more about what I think about drones. And if you're watching this as a recorded show, I should put a link somewhere around here to watch that video, and I'll put it down in the video description, although I didn't get a chance to before this broadcast began. So I want to move on to the next topic, which is the upcoming oral arguments about marriage equality in the U.S. Supreme Court this week. There's a big case in which the Supreme Court is expected to find that marriage equality is a constitutional right, that the fundamental right to marry extends to same-sex couples. And I'm going to show 4 clips on this, including a couple from right-wing wacko Tony Perkins from the Family Research Council. But first, I want to show an introductory report from ABC's This Week with George Stephanopoulos. Their reporter, Jonathan Karl, reported on the case at the Supreme Court and some of the other issues with marriage equality over in this clip.
Sex marriage. Oral arguments Tuesday at a time of remarkable change, with 37 states now permitting same-sex marriage. ABC's John Karl is covering this landmark case.
The case that could spark an historic Supreme Court ruling imposing same-sex marriage on all 50 states started out with a simple request from a couple in Ohio. Jim Obergefell's husband was dying of Lou Gehrig's disease. Jim was told he couldn't be listed as a surviving spouse because Ohio wouldn't recognize their Maryland marriage.
Being able to marry John was the happiest moment of my life. It made a difference having that legal document that recognized us as a couple.
Now it all comes down to how these 9 men and women read the 14th Amendment's guarantee of due process and equal protection under the law. Do those words give gays and lesbians the right to marry? And if not, do they at least require states to recognize marriages like Jim Obergefell's from other states? It's an issue where views have changed sharply in an incredibly short time. From the president 7 years ago,
marriage is the union between a man and a woman,
to 3 years ago.
I think same-sex couples should be able to get married.
And the public has shifted dramatically too. On Thursday, an ABC News Washington Post poll with a new record. 61% of Americans say gays should be allowed to marry. A total flip from 2004, when a nearly identical percentage opposed same-sex marriage. But Sharif Girgis, who wrote a brief supporting traditional marriage, says this is not about discrimination.
This isn't about limiting anyone's personal liberty or controlling anyone's love life. It's about upholding a particular ideal to give kids the best shot at being reared by their own mom and dad. This is exactly the kind of issue the court should leave to the people, to the states.
Most conservatives will be closely watching Justice Anthony Kennedy, a Reagan appointee who 2 years ago was the key vote knocking down the federal ban on same-sex marriage. Will he be the deciding vote again, this time making marriage equality a constitutional right? For This Week, Jonathan Karl, ABC News, Washington.
So I thought that was a really good overview from Jonathan Karl on ABC's This Week with George Stephanopoulos, and they followed that up with a discussion between a proponent of marriage equality and an opponent of marriage equality, which I'm not going to show any clips from that, even though it was kind of an interesting discussion. If you want to see the whole thing, there's a link down in the video description to the whole This Week program, which you can probably access. I don't think you need to have a cable show or a cable subscription, although sometimes it asks for mine. But anyway, I do want to show another interesting clip on marriage equality. This is from NBC's Meet the Press, and an interesting thing about the NBC coverage is they actually didn't have an opponent of marriage equality, even though both people who they had on were on the side I agree with. I think it's a little bit biased not to have an opponent of same-sex marriage on the program when the case is up and they're talking about it. They did have, it's a liberal and a conservative. It's David Boies and Ted Olson, who argued against each other on Bush v. Gore. One's a Democrat, one's a Republican, but they're the two that teamed up to be on the side of marriage equality in the Prop 8 case here from California. That was the part of, you heard that discussed in that Jonathan Karl piece. Anyway, here's David Boies and Ted Olson answering a question I hear a lot online in comments posted to my videos, or having discussed this over many years, about why marriage equality for same-sex couples doesn't lead to polygamy. It's actually kind of a silly question, and you can hear both of them kind of say that it's a silly question, or give really good arguments as to why it's not the same as marriage equality for same-sex couples, talking to Chuck Todd over here.
Mr. Roy, what about and you hear this argument from the right that says, okay, same-sex marriage is going to become constitutionally legal, let's say the Supreme Court does this, then can you constitutionally ban polygamy? This is where this is going to go. How do you constitutionally ban polygamy?
Well, first of all, that's a silly argument. It really is. This has to do with equal rights. What we're saying is that you can't deprive a loving couple of marriage simply based on their sexual orientation. Just like you can't deprive a loving biracial couple of the right to get married. The Supreme Court held that many, many years ago. What you have in the polygamy case is situations where you're going to have multiple partners. And there's all sorts of evidence that has harmful effects on some of the people participating and on the children. So there's a policy reason. But more important, there's a legal reason. And that is you're not discriminating against anybody. Everybody gets to have one spouse. Right. As long as you don't restrict it based on race, gender, sexual orientation, everybody's treated equal under the Constitution. What you can't do is you can't say some people are second class. And so some people can marry the person they love, one man, one woman, but two men, two women, they can't get married simply because of their sexual orientation or their gender. That's what's unconstitutional about it. The polygamy thing has nothing to do with it.
The overwhelming evidence in the case that we tried is that sexual orientation is something that's an immutable characteristic of an individual. Choosing to have multiple spouses is a choice. It's not a part of an innate characteristic. So we're discriminating against people because of their sexual orientation. Polygamy has nothing to do with it.
All right, I'm going to make you...
So, like I said, I think all those arguments were good distinctions between marriage equality for same-sex couples and the issue of polygamy, though I'm not sure that polygamy should be not protected by the Constitution under, like, religious liberty, possibly. The case that found... it's a really old case, the Reynolds case, if I'm remembering the name correctly, right around the time Utah joined the United States and outlawed polygamy. There was a case that upheld the laws outlawing polygamy in Utah, and despite religious liberty claims. And there are certainly differences between the possible negative effects of polygamy and the possible negative effects of same-sex marriage. Some of the distinctions that you heard David Boies and Ted Olson talk about there, but I'm still not sure that polygamists shouldn't get constitutional protections by a set of different arguments than same-sex couples should get I mean, they should obviously, just under equal protection and under rational basis analysis, there's no reasonable basis for excluding them from the current marriage benefits between any two people should be able to get married, and discriminating on the basis of the gender or sexual orientation doesn't even have a rational basis, and so is unconstitutional under the Equal Protection Clause. But speaking of rational bases, I want to show someone who isn't completely rational on this issue, Tony Perkins from the Family Research Council. He has been called, the Family Research Council has been called by the Southern Poverty Law Center as a hate group because of their really strident anti-gay stance. They're not quite to the level of the Westboro Baptist Church, the so-called, or you see them sometimes holding up like the God Hates Fag signs at funerals, but they're pretty close to that. And Bob Schieffer had on Tony Perkins on Face the Nation this morning, and actually it started with a little introduction about people lining up to see the Supreme Court case, and then mentioned how the Family Research Council has been called a hate group by the Southern Poverty Law Center, and you can see Tony Perkins' response to that over in this clip.
Here's something you don't see very often in Washington. These people have been lining up all weekend in hope of getting a seat in the Supreme Court arguments scheduled for Tuesday. This is a case that could ultimately settle whether the right to marry someone of the same sex is constitutionally protected. We're going to hear from both sides. Evan Wolfson is the head of Freedom to Marry, a group that's lobbied for gays to marry. He's in New York this morning, but I'm going to start with probably the most vocal opponent of same-sex marriage, and that is Tony Perkins. He is the president of the Family Research Council. And Ms. Perkins, I'm going to say this to you up front. You and your group have been so strong in coming out against this and against gay marriage that the Southern Poverty Law Center has branded the Family Research Council an anti-gay hate group. We have been inundated by people who say we should not even let you appear because they, in their view, quote, you don't speak for Christians. Do you think you have taken this too far?
No, Bob, we stand, well, first of all, let me say thank you for allowing us to continue to have this discussion, because I think it's a discussion that's going to continue on, regardless of what the court says. The court is not going to settle this issue. In fact, I think it does a disservice to both sides if the court weighs in on public policy like this. The courts are decided to interpret the Constitution and the constitutionality of laws, not create public policy. When they do that, they create division and they erect barriers to reaching consensus on public policy like this. And so no, we stand with millennia of experience that the union of a man and woman, the sacred union of marriage, is the cornerstone of society. That's where kids learn to become citizens.
I don't know. We stand with millennia. Is he admitting that he's like from some previous? Which millennia is he from? Is it from? I guess we're starting a new millennium now. So, is he from the first millennium, the second millennium, or I guess we're now in our third post Jesus millennium, if that's how you count your time. That should be how he counts his time, right? Tony Perkins from the Family Research Council. And I want to show one more clip from him that I thought was especially ridiculous, where Bob Schieffer confronts him with one of his statements about how if the Supreme Court finds in favor of a right for marriage equality, that it'll be open season on people of faith. And he talks specifically about this case of a baker in Oregon, that somehow he thinks baking goods for a wedding means participating in the wedding, which I think is really bogus, as I'll discuss after you see that clip over here.
Well, you said the other day, and I believe these are your words, if the court rules in favor of gay marriage, it would be open season on people of faith.
Absolutely.
I mean, how can you say that?
Oh, I can say it very clearly. When this is what's at stake here, Bob. This is not about the marriage altar. This is about fundamentally altering the culture. Just on Friday, a bakery in Oregon was fined $135,000 for not refusing to serve gay people, but simply saying, we cannot participate in a same-sex wedding because it violates our Christian faith. $135,000. Within hours, though, about $100,000 was raised for this couple until gay activists demanded that GoFundMe take down their site.
Well, gay activists demanded they take down the GoFundMe site because GoFundMe has a policy that they don't allow people to fund violations of the law, and this baker was fined for discriminating against customers and violating an anti-discrimination law. And how is that participating in a wedding? I mean, I got married. There was a baker that made our wedding cake, and I think we had a couple other things, something called a croquant bouche. And I remember meeting with the guy, this French pastry chef who made the wedding cake before the wedding, and him talking about how he used only butter, no shortening, and but he made the cake and we took it to the wedding, and I don't remember the baker participating in the wedding in any way. The baker was not at the wedding, did not participate in the wedding. We bought a cake and possibly these like pastry, these like cream puffs in a big pyramid called a croquant bouche, but I don't remember the baker participating in our wedding in any way. So you let me know down in the comment section, is there some way that a baker, I mean, I could see a photographer maybe a little more would have to participate in the wedding, but a baker, that's kind of silly. You can let me know what you think. And before I leave the issue of LGBT rights, I want to show a quick clip from ABC's This Week with George Stephanopoulos, because Bruce Jenner had this interview on ABC with Diane Sawyer, and there were a couple clips of it played on This Week with George Stephanopoulos in a report from ABC reporter Chris Connelly, who talked about what this means for transgender rights, which I want to talk about a little bit after I show you that clip here.
Are you a Republican?
Yeah. Is that a bad thing?
Are you going to go to Mitch McConnell and John Boehner and ask them to help champion this cause?
I would do that, yeah, in a heartbeat. Why not? Yeah, and I think they'd be very receptive to it.
Bruce Jenner, Republican, just one of the revelations from his remarkable interview with Diane Sawyer Friday night. Instantly, he became the most famous transgender person in the world. But will his now public journey change the way we all deal with transgender issues? Chris Connelly takes a look at that.
For all intents and purposes, I am a woman.
Bruce Jenner going public with feelings that have been harbored since childhood, hoping this revelation makes a difference.
What I'm doing is going to do some good, and we're going to change the world. I really firmly believe that.
Jenner's announcement comes at a time that's been called a tipping point for the transgender community. 2 critically acclaimed television shows feature transgender characters. And in January, the word transgender made it into the State of the Union, a presidential first.
That's why we defend free speech and condemn the persecution of women or religious minorities or people who are lesbian, gay, bisexual, or transgender.
An estimated 700,000 Americans identify as transgender. And while awareness of gender identity issues is growing, advocates say there are still big hurdles to clear. 32 states have no laws protecting transgender people from job discrimination. The military bans transgender people from serving openly. And as Jenner told Diane Sawyer, transgender men and women often face life-threatening struggles.
The suicide rates, murder rates, the difficulty for especially black female trans women.
Gender Hope's opening up about transitioning to a woman will spark change. For This Week, Chris Connelly, ABC News, New York.
Liberal Viewer presents.
Oop. I guess it wouldn't be a show if I didn't hit the wrong clip. That time I hit the intro clip, the Liberal Viewer Presents clip, instead of the clip of, or the window that has me on camera. Sorry about that. On the whole Bruce Jenner issue, I did not get a chance to see the entire Bruce Jenner interview, but I do think it's really important that transgender rights see progress in this country. Last summer, I spent a day at this gender spectrum conference. I was sent by the ACLU. They actually paid my way to go to this conference and get educated about transgender rights and some of the issues that people who have different gender identities and gender fluidity experience. And I really appreciate my mind getting opened on the issue and learning more things about the way there's sort of an infinite different types of ways that people's gender identity and gender expression and sexual orientation, if you combine all those attributes, you get sort of a infinite diversity of people's different ways of expressing and identifying, and I'm glad that that's getting more recognition and more legal protection. Especially here in California, we passed a bill that recognized the legal protections that people of different gender identities have to use facilities in government buildings and schools and government programs that match their gender identity. Some people call it the bathroom bill because it lets kids in school use the bathroom that matches the gender they identify with. And unfortunately, this last week, there was an initiative that qualified to start getting signatures to qualify for the 2016 ballot that would take some of that away, that would say that people in California in government buildings shall use the facilities that match their biological sex. Is basically this initiative that's sponsored by these right-wing Christian groups. One is the Pacific Justice Institute, which I've had dealings with many years ago that showed them to be kind of dishonest. So, and I read the actual initiative, and it doesn't even make sense because it talks about being able to sue the government for violating a law that says that you have to, that people shall use the facilities that match their biological sex. But how can a government even violate that? It doesn't even make sense. But anyway, I wanted to talk about that a little bit, having shown that clip of Bruce Jenner. And now I want to move on to one of my last few topics. This is the last one with multiple clips. I think I have like 8 clips on Hillary Clinton and the issue of this book that hasn't even come out yet. It's coming out May 5th, I think. It's called Clinton Cash, written by this guy Peter Schweizer. And he's basically trying to say that contributions to the Clinton Foundation influenced Hillary Clinton's actions as Secretary of State. And I'm going to show several clips on this, like I said, starting with a pretty good summary from ABC's, I think it's ABC, right? Yeah. First I want to show a clip from HBO's Real Time with Bill Maher from the monologue where Bill Maher kind of skewers the partisan background of the author of this book, Clinton Cash, because he's this right-wing guy, Tea Party guy, as I'll talk about in a little bit. And here's what Bill Maher makes of his background over in this clip.
No, and I'm not saying there's not a scandal there, but you know what? The author is a guy named Peter Schweizer. He's a former policy advisor to Sarah Palin. He was the one who explained to her that the blue stuff on the maps was water. I don't know if the Clintons are hiding anything, but if I advised Sarah Palin on foreign policy, I would concentrate on burying that. It's like your resume saying, I also do Donald Trump's hair. Donald Trump's hair, you know. Oh, thank you. You're out.
So that was pretty funny, although, talking about burying Peter Schweizer's connection with Sarah Palin, I didn't really see that much mentioned in the other news coverage, and some legitimate news organizations have covered some of these allegations in Peter Schweizer's book, Clinton Cash. The New York Times, I think the Washington Post, ABC, and of course Fox News has been covering it wall to wall, and I'll show several clips of Fox News trying to make the most of this partisan attack book on Hillary Clinton. But first I'm going to show the summary from ABC's This Week with George Stephanopoulos. They had their reporter who is covering the Hillary Clinton campaign. I think I've shown clips from her the last few weeks. Cecilia, Vega is her name. And she talks about Clinton cash. She I think, airs the charges or the accusations and, talks about the appearance of impropriety, but also talks about some of the problems with the message and the messenger over in this clip.
The book hasn't even been released. It's already creating another campaign firestorm for Hillary Clinton. We asked the Clinton campaign to appear this morning. They chose not to, but author Peter Schweizer is standing by live to lay out his case after this report from ABC's Cecilia Vega.
For Hillary Clinton, the hits just keep on coming.
A firestorm as questions mount about cash donations.
A presidential campaign just 2 weeks old, dogged by report after report questioning millions in foreign donations to the Clinton Foundation while Hillary Clinton was Secretary of State. Many of those claims laid out in a new book, Clinton Cash. Author Peter Schweizer making this bold charge. My research team and I have uncovered a repeated pattern of financial transactions coinciding with official actions favorable to Clinton contributors. One of his examples, the State Department, one of several agencies signing off on the 2010 sale of one of America's largest uranium mines to Russia. The book claims the company's Canadian chairman used his family charity to donate more than $2 million to the Clinton Foundation. And though Clinton promised the White House the foundation would disclose donors,
there is not an inherent conflict of interest.
The book claims it didn't always do that. And this, ABC News has learned that while Clinton was Secretary of State, her husband's speaking fees in many cases doubled, even tripled.
Thank you.
Bill Clinton raking in millions, some of that from groups with interests pending before the State Department. Although ABC found no evidence that Hillary Clinton took action based on these contributions. On the campaign trail, we asked Clinton about the controversy.
Did foreign entities receive any special treatment for making any kind of donations to the foundation or your husband?
The Republicans seem to be talking only about me. I don't know what they'd talk about if I weren't in the race.
Her camp calling the claims of undue influence partisan-fueled fiction. On that uranium deal, they say, the essential fact is that Hillary Clinton was not involved in the State Department's review of the sale to Russians. Republicans see it differently.
The notion that somehow official U.S. policy was influenced by donations, that's a troubling allegation. If proven to be true, I think is a disqualifier.
Allegations that don't hit store shelves until May 5th. For This Week, Cecilia Vega, ABC News, New York.
Troubling allegations, although I think that ABC report from Cecilia Vega did talk about some of the criticisms and also mentioned that ABC hasn't been able to verify any actual quid pro quo or evidence that any of these contributions to the Clinton Foundation affected any actions by Hillary Clinton. I mean, there is a difference between this big money in politics and the other big money in politics that we're used to, and that this money is being donated to a charitable foundation that, from what I understand, does a bunch of really good work around the world. And it's not like donations to a political campaign or to the Clintons themselves, although they did talk about those speaking fees for President Clinton went up around the time Hillary Clinton became Secretary of State, although one alternative explanation I thought of for that no one really mentioned on the Sunday shows this morning is that's also the time when Democrats returned to power in the executive branch when Obama became president, and Bill Clinton is, a really connected Democrat, so of course people who just want to buddy up to Democrats in general would start donating more to Clinton in his speaking fees than they did before. When Bush was president, Clinton did not have as much, Washington cachet or worldwide cachet, or whatever you want to call it. So I wanted to mention that as a possible reason why the Bill Clinton's speaking fees went up when Hillary Clinton became Secretary of State. Now, I mentioned that Fox News has given a lot of coverage to this issue over the last week, and of course on Fox News Sunday it was the top issue, as you can see when you look at the intro to Fox News Sunday this morning, this is just their intro clip as to what are the top stories over here.
I'm Chris Wallace. Allegations that millions of dollars in speaking fees and foreign donations bought favors from the Clinton State Department.
It's so hard when you look at the Clintons to try to figure out where the charity ends and begins, where their profit-making ends and begins, and where their official powers as Secretary of State or Senator ends and begins.
We'll talk with Peter Schweizer, author of the explosive book Clinton Cash, in his first live interview. Then, a Clinton insider responds to the allegations. Do you ever get tired of cleaning up after the Clintons? Former White House special counsel Lanny Davis is back to deal with this latest Clinton controversy. Plus, a U.S. drone strike mistakenly kills 2 Western hostages held by al-Qaeda.
As president and as commander-in-chief, I take full responsibility for all our counterterrorism operations. I profoundly regret what happened.
Our Sunday group weighs in on whether the president's counterterrorism strategy needs to be changed.
So an American killed by terrorists was a less important story on Fox News for once than a book that hasn't even been released because, of course, it's an anti-Hillary Clinton book and she's the putative Democratic nominee. And I want to also point out that clip they showed of Lanny Davis, I'm going to show one clip of this week's interview with Lanny Davis, but the clip they showed from the interview with Lanny Davis last March was totally dishonest because it showed how Chris Wallace confronted him with this charge that you clean up after the Clintons. How does it feel to be the person who always cleans up after the Clintons? And then shows Lanny Davis laughing. But for those who watched my show last March that included that clip, Lanny Davis then totally laid into Chris Wallace, and it was a really combative interview where he totally attacked the premise of that question. Didn't think he was cleaning up for the Clintons at all, but of course that never got cleaned up on Fox News Sunday this morning. And I also want to show you how Fox News Sunday dealt with this Clinton Cash book. I showed you how ABC's Cecilia Vega talked about the allegations and then also talked about how there wasn't proof for the allegations and there was criticism. Of course, I don't think you'll see that in the report from Fox News Sunday where Chris Wallace introduced it and then talked about how they were going to talk to Peter Schweizer and then over to Brett Baer, who did a 1-hour report on the book earlier in the week that I can't say that I watched. That's just too much for me. But anyway, here is how Fox News Sunday summarized Clinton Cash without any of the criticisms of the author and his partisanship or lack of evidence over here.
News in Washington. Well, it's the old adage, follow the money. And in the case of Hillary Clinton, who's just launched her presidential campaign, following the money has led to some troubling questions. Today, we want to drill down into the controversy with Peter Schweizer, author of the new book, Clinton Cash, here for his first live interview. But first, special report anchor Brett Baer, who's been leading Fox News reporting on the book, has the highlights. Brett.
Chris, the dealings of Bill and Hillary Clinton are part of what Clinton Cash author Peter Schweizer calls the Clinton blur, a mix of money and politics, diplomacy and personal interest, all so interconnected that it's pretty easy to get lost. From lucrative reconstruction deals given to Clinton friends and donors after the earthquake in Haiti, to $500,000 and $750,000 speeches for Bill Clinton paid for by countries or foreign companies with some action or policy in front of his then Secretary of State wife. To a major uranium mining deal for Clinton friend Frank Giustra, a deal with the country of Kazakhstan that is finalized during a Giustra trip with former President Clinton.
And then soon after that, Bill Clinton got a huge donation, $31 million from Frank Giustra to his charitable foundation, followed by a pledge to donate $100 million more.
The company became Uranium One and was eventually sold to a Russian company that is essentially controlled by Vladimir Putin. They now also control more than 20% of American uranium. Officials with Uranium One and investors who profited from that deal donated more than $140 million to the Clinton Foundation. But millions of dollars in donations were never disclosed, flying in the face of a deal the Clintons struck with the Obama administration. Again, all of this does not fit on a bumper sticker, but from the book and various media organizations like the New York Times, the Washington Post, and Fox News, connecting some of the dots here, most political watchers will tell you this is, at best for Hillary Clinton, a serious political issue for her campaign. Chris?
So, yeah, that's the version without any of the criticism of the source, Peter Schweizer being this Tea Party, Sarah Palin guy. That never gets mentioned. And, of course, whether this is going to make it from Fox News world into the real world, even though it's been looked at by the New York Times and the Washington Post and ABC, they haven't really confirmed any smoking gun. But I don't want to say that Fox News didn't show any criticism of the theories in this book, Clinton Cash. Here's sort of some light criticism that, or light confrontation, I should say, from Chris Wallace in his interview with the author of Clinton Cash, Peter Schweizer, about the lack of evidence that there's any real quid pro quo or action by Hillary Clinton that is in response to one of these donations to the foundation. And the silly or the funny part about it is that Peter Schweizer's defense is that he's a journalist, and you would think that Chris Wallace would then jump in with the fact that he has partisan bias, but that didn't really come up at this part, in this part of the interview. In clip, let me make sure I get the correct clip number, number 32 over here.
Again, if I may, you don't have a single piece of evidence that she was involved in this deal, that she sent a memo to the person, the State Department representative who was on this committee and said, hey, we want to approve the uranium one sale.
I am a journalist, and so I don't have access to government records. I certainly don't have access to her emails. It doesn't seem like anybody does. But the fundamental question is, with this deal and with the others that we cite in the book, is it coincidence? Is it coincidence in a pattern that we see repeated dozens of times, where large Clinton supporters have business before the State Department, they make large payments, and favorable actions are taken? I don't think that coincidences occur that frequently.
All right, let's take a...
So, no, he called himself a journalist. Chris Wallace did not bring up the fact that he worked for Sarah Palin or any of his partisan connections. At that point in the interview, it wasn't until about 15 minutes into the program that Chris Wallace brought up that Hillary Clinton's campaign claims he's a partisan, and then gave him a chance to say how nonpartisan he is, and how he talked about inside trading and talked about some Republicans, especially Republicans in the past who were already out of Congress. And the other thing, I'm not sure it's in this clip, but he also supposedly is doing a book on Jeb Bush, but none of that means he's not like a Tea Party Republican who would be against the establishment Republicans anyway. But anyway, here's how Chris Wallace does, in at least small part, confront Peter Schweizer with his partisan past, at least as claimed by Hillary Clinton's campaign over in this clip.
The Clinton camp notes that you worked for George W. Bush in his White House. They note that you also work for the conservative news website, Breitbart. And what they say, in effect, is this is a right-wing hit job.
Well, it's an interesting statement. The two previous books I've done, I did Throw Them All Out, which looked at insider trading and self-enrichment by members of Congress. And, I highlighted prominent Republicans, people like Dennis Hastert, the Republican chairman of the House Financial Services Committee, and his stock trades. In the more recent book that I did, Extortion, I was criticized by John Boehner because I looked at some of his fundraising practices, which I consider extortive. So, the facts are the facts. And when we finished researching and writing this book, I went to the investigative units at the New York Times, Washington Post, at Fox News and ABC, precisely because I wanted this evidence to be evaluated and looked at, to not be seen in partisan terms. These are not cupcakes. These are not partisans. These are serious journalists, and they are confirming the reporting that we found.
Finally.
Now, at the end there, Peter Schweizer claimed that these other news organizations were confirming what he found. Now, other than some misdisclosures, the Clinton Foundation didn't disclose some of the many contributions it gets, even though it was supposed to, and is now amending its disclosures. But there's been none of these other news organizations have actually confirmed any sort of smoking gun, any connection between donations to the Clinton Foundation and actions by Hillary Clinton as Secretary of State. And the next clip I want to show is what a little bit more of a vigorous confrontation of Peter Schweizer would look like, because of course Chris Wallace never brought up any of those things I just mentioned. This is from ABC's This Week with George Stephanopoulos. Host George Stephanopoulos questioned Peter Schweizer. This is the one clip I'm going to show from that interview, but it was much more combative, and you can see the whole thing by clicking on a link down in the video description. But here he is talking about the lack of proof, the lack of confirming proof from other news organizations, and the lack of a smoking gun over here.
Action than there were in those two instances.
As you know, the Clinton campaign says you haven't produced a shred of evidence that there was any official action as secretary that supported the interests of donors. We've done investigative work here at ABC News, found no proof of any kind of direct action. And an independent government ethics expert, Bill Allison of the Sunline Foundation, wrote this. He said, there's no smoking gun, no evidence that she changed a policy based on donations to the foundation. No smoking gun. Is there a smoking gun?
Yes, the smoking gun is in the pattern of behavior. And here's the analogy I would give you. It's a little bit like insider trading. I wrote a book on congressional insider trading a couple of years ago and talked with prosecutors. Most people that engage in criminal insider trading don't send an email that says, I've got inside information, buy this stock. The way they look at it is they look at a pattern of stock trades. If the person has access to that information and they do a series of well-timed trades, that warrants investigation. I think the same thing applies here. By the way, what's important to note is it was confirmed on Thursday, both by the New York Times and the Wall Street Journal, that there are multi-million-dollar non-disclosed donations that were made to the Clinton Foundation that were never disclosed by the Clintons. This is a direct breach of an agreement they signed with the White House.
That is an issue for them, but it's not a criminal. It's not nothing that would warrant a criminal investigation. So let's look.
So that analogy to insider trading, I don't think it really holds up, because the pattern of trades in insider trading shows people who trade on information before it becomes public. So the timing of the trades actually does have a lot of probative value, a lot more so than the fact that people give donations to the Clinton Foundation and then they have issues that are issues that are up for decision by the executive branch of the U.S. government. What that seems to me more like is that the Clintons are using their fundraising ability that they've developed through their political activities for a better cause. Actually, the Clinton Foundation that does all this good work, they're basically getting all the rich people who donate to their political ventures to donate to something that actually helps people a lot more. But I don't know, maybe I'm not cynical enough, or I'm being too rosy about it. You can let me know whether you think I'm being too soft on the Clintons, because I'm not a big fan of the Clintons or even Hillary Clinton, as I've mentioned in previous shows. But I do want to show one more clip on this whole issue. This is the clip I promised at the beginning of Lanny Davis, former lawyer for the Bill Clinton administration, that helped them deal with the Monica Lewinsky scandal and some of the campaign finance scandals. And I talked about how in the intro to Fox News Sunday they showed this very brief clip of Lanny Davis being confronted by Chris Wallace that he cleans up for the Clintons, and he like laughed, but they didn't show his angry response where he was really combative. That was from the interview last March. And what I think is really remarkable about this answer is about halfway through, I think, Lanny Davis mentions that Chris Wallace has cut him off without allowing him to answer for at least 30 seconds, which makes me think that they had some sort of deal for him to come back on Fox News Sunday where Chris Wallace is supposed to let him answer for at least 30 seconds before cutting him off and, doing a follow-up question. But this is actually, the substance of this has some import in that it's about whether the Clinton Foundation was really transparent, whether they publicly disclosed all their donors, or whether it was a mistake, and about this one Russian donor. But look for that part about the, you said you would give me 30 seconds and let me know what you think that means over in this clip.
All right. And in fact, the Clinton Foundation donors are all named. There are no anonymous donors, unlike lots of other nonprofits. And moreover, I don't think, but for a few inadvertent errors, they've ever violated the agreement on transparency and on taking money from foreign governments.
But we know, because of the reporting in Peter Schweizer's book, of one major violation of this, a failure to disclose, and that is that Ian Telfer, who was the chairman of Uranium One, that uranium company that the Russians wanted to buy, gave $2.35 million to the Clinton Foundation through his family's Fernwood Foundation, and yet that contribution, $2.35 million, I mean, I know the Clintons have a lot of money, but that's not pocket change. That contribution was never reported.
Look, we've known each other for a long time. You use the word major, you're entitled to that adjective.
You don't think $2.35 million is major?
Let me finish. You were going to give me 30 seconds. $2.3 million out of $2 billion is not major, even by any definition. And moreover, there is, let's say, not on this program to resolve, a fundamental dispute whether Mr. Telfer's $2.3 million was given to the foundation or to another organization based in Canada that was a fund for social activity.
Which, in every other case, passed the money straight through to the foundation and it was reported.
As I said, we do not think that that was a contribution to the foundation, but if it was $2.3 million divided by $2 billion, the amount of money the foundation has collected over all the years, to me, $2.3 million divided by $2 billion is not what Chris Wallace called major.
So, I don't know. You can let me know what you think on whether there's any substance to this Clinton Foundation scandal from the Clinton Cash book. I haven't seen the smoking gun, but I guess it does sort of increase the scandal smoke around Hillary Clinton that goes back through the Bill Clinton administration. But did you notice that one point where he said, like, let me finish, you said I'd get 30 seconds? That seemed to be a reference to some deal he made with Chris Wallace, that if he appeared on Fox News Sunday, he wouldn't be cut off without answering for at least 30 seconds. Is that my imagination, or did anyone else get that interpretation of what he said? You can let me know what you think down in the comment section. So I have two quick subjects I want to cover, each with one clip. The first one is campaign finance reform, money in politics. Was covered over on HBO's Real Time with Bill Maher, and of course everyone seemed to, or not everyone, but Bill Maher and at least one other guest totally misstated what Citizens United is about, and Bill Maher even got mad when people pointed out he was misstating what Citizens United is about, as I'll discuss after you see that clip over here.
I bet he'd apologize.
Do you guys still defend Citizens United, the system we have now?
I would defend a part of it, which is that there's a lot of people who know a lot about Hillary Clinton that they wouldn't have known other than without the movie that would have been banned by Citizens United. That would have been banned.
Okay, but we're talking about the fact of the unlimited money so that billionaires can give. I mean, I remember in 2008, you could give, what, $2,300? Okay, 2012, I remember I gave $1 million. okay, because I was trying to make the point, hey, this is where the field has moved to the $1 million level. Well, that's quaint now. Yeah. $1 million is, now we're at the $1 billion level. This is not free speech. This is not what the founders intended, is it? This is not fair.
Well, I mean, Citizens United fundamentally deals with the issue of broadcast and within certain time periods of the election. It's a very specific thing. I think generally people now hear Citizens United and they use that as sort of a shorthand for money in politics.
Well, yeah. Okay, well, that's what I'm talking about.
Right.
The decision that allowed unlimited money in politics.
But it allowed something very specific. My point is that if you weren't doing like broadcast-based particular electioneering, there was still unlimited. I mean, you had lots of soft money in politics. You had lots of advocacy, and all of these things could influence it. As for your point about the film, I actually don't know very many people who've seen that, so I actually don't.
It's not about the movie, you two. Come on, let's get off this bullshit idea that it's about seeing a movie.
To decide it the other way would have meant saying you can't show this movie, which would have been an outright First Amendment.
But it's not about the movie. It's about the $889 million that the Koch brothers are going to put into the election, which makes them the equivalent of a third party.
Yes.
Like that is as much
party.
money.
Well, I personally.
And but what's really, really amazing about that, and I want people to put this in context, that is less than 1% of what the Koch brothers own. But this is just a drop in the bucket. They are just like play money.
Now, the Koch brothers has nothing to do with Citizens United, because what Anne-Marie Cox, is that her name, was talking about there, has nothing to do with corporate money, independent expenditures. That's rich people spending their own money. And I don't know why Bill Maher gets so mad when someone tries to confuse him with the facts there, that Citizens United doesn't cover rich people spending their money in super PACs. It is actually about a law that would have put people in jail for talking negatively about Hillary Clinton, advertising this movie that was attacking Hillary Clinton 60 days before an election because it included the use of some corporate money. Putting people in jail for slamming Hillary Clinton before an election, that is a First Amendment issue. And saying that, I don't know why people get mad when you confuse them with the facts. Like, there was a different case in the D.C. Court of Appeals that let rich people give unlimited money to super PACs. That's called Free Speech Now versus FEC, and that's a whole different issue than Citizens United. So I don't know why Bill Maher got so mad about that. The last clip I want to show for tonight has to do with a different kind of free speech issue. This has to do with Charlie Hebdo. There was a controversy a while back where one of my favorite cartoonists, Garry G.B. Trudeau, who does the Doonesbury cartoons that started back in the Yale Daily News in my alma mater, Yale University, he said that he really supported the victims in Charlie Hebdo and their free speech, but also said that he wouldn't make some of the choices they made, and he clarified that talking to Chuck Todd on NBC's Meet the Press. It is Meet the Press, yeah, this morning in this final clip of the show tonight here.
If you don't know Garry Trudeau, you definitely know his work. He's the Pulitzer Prize-winning cartoonist and the creator of the political comic strip Doonesbury. He's also executive producer of the Amazon show Alpha House. But earlier this month, you may have heard about him for a different reason. While accepting the George Polk Award, he criticized some of the work that appeared in the French satirical magazine Charlie Hebdo. They were, of course, the victims of the terror attack in January of this year. Trudeau said the magazine's cartoons satirizing Mohammed, quote, wandered into the realm of hate speech. So I started in my sit-down with him by asking him about those comments and whether, as some critics have alleged about him, that he thought the victims were to blame for the tragedy.
Oh, not at all. And I think perhaps I should have made it a little clear that I was as outraged as the rest of the world at the time. I mourned them deeply. We're a very small fraternity of political cartoonists around the globe. Tribute page to them on a Sunday section in which I included the work of all 5 cartoonists, including their signatures and their main characters. what I didn't do is necessarily agree with the decisions they made that brought really a world of pain to France.
Is religion the red line for you? Is that the issue?
Not entirely. I certainly wouldn't draw pictures of the prophet. However, I've done many cartoons satirizing in the specific terrorists, the Taliban, Al Qaeda, the PLO through the years, and have never received any blowback from the Muslim community. They understand that I'm separating out the two.
So yeah, I mostly agree with what Garry Trudeau said there, that, you know, so-called hate speech is protected speech, even First Amendment protected speech, but that doesn't mean that it's something I would necessarily want to say. Some of the things Charlie Hebdo said aren't things that I would feel comfortable saying, je suis Charlie, and to the extent that I endorse everything they ever said as something that I think is in good taste, or I would want to be something I would say, but that doesn't mean that they should be attacked or that they should be blamed for being victims. And so I think he struck pretty much the right note there. You can tell me what you think down in the comment section. I'm pretty much done with the show. If you look up in the corner here, if you put your mouse pointer up there, there should be a little eye that if you click on, you can donate to support my show, especially with some of the dwindling advertising revenue, either through a direct donation or through a monthly patron contribution on Patreon. I will also post all of the live comments that over 100 of you showed up live. I appreciate your comments. I've been reading them along the way, even though I haven't had a chance to refer to any of them. But this show's gotten kind of long. It's over an hour and 45 minutes, so I want to finish up, and I should hopefully have an excerpt video this week, which I haven't done for the last couple weeks, and maybe one of those edited, produced Fox News bias videos if I can finally get to it. No promises, but maybe this week, and whether I do that or not, I will be doing this show as usual, 6:30 p.m. Pacific or thereabouts, every Sunday. My live Sunday clip roundup. I hope you appreciated the 37 clips I picked out for you, and you thought they were informative, at least in terms of what the corporate media thought was important this last week here in the United States. And until my show next week, I guess I'll be seeing you all around the internet.